Hey everybody, it's Ed. Before we start, I want to thank some brand new Patreon supporters: Katie Hoskins, Emily Downing, Tyler Garwood, Watson Betts, JD Crones, and Steve Brindle. All 6 of these folks went to mountainandprairie.com/support and decided to support the podcast through Patreon. Patreon really is the financial foundation of everything that is Mountain and Prairie. And so I really appreciate these 6 folks signing up. You can see a full list of everybody who supported the podcast over the years at mountainandprairie.com/support. But thank you very much to these 6 folks, and thank you to everyone who supported over the years. This is the Mountain and Prairie Podcast. I'm Ed Robertson. My guest today is Kathie Sever. Kathie is an artist, designer, and the founder of Fort Lonesome, an Austin-based company that creates one-of-a-kind, hand-cranked, chain-stitched Western wear. What started with Kathie hand-embroidering garments for her friends out of her home has transformed over the years into a globally known fashion brand that's worn by well-known personalities, including Matthew McConaughey and singer-songwriter Nikki Lane. Using decades-old chain-stitching machines, Kathie and her team create some of the most intricate and rich designs imaginable, and Fort Lonesome has been credited with the resurgence of Western wear's popularity in fashion circles around the world. Kathie was born, raised, and educated in California, but soon after graduating from art school, she took off for Montana, where she worked at a dude ranch. She worked at the ranch off and on for several years, and she took note of how the ranchers brought creativity, craftsmanship, and an artist's eye to so many of their tasks, from welding to sewing to leatherwork. Kathie loved the idea of functional art, and she has since made a career of combining handcrafted artistry with pragmatic design. And now, as the head of Fort Lonesome, she and her team continue to innovate and push the boundaries of functional art, with Fort Lonesome's unique brand of what they call cosmic Western wear. I love this conversation with Kathie and could have talked with her for many more hours. We covered a lot, including Kathie's upbringing in California and how her family affected her artistic trajectory, her experience in Montana and how it laid the foundation for Fort Lonesome, her work as a pastry chef and some of the challenges of working in the restaurant scene in the 1990s, the power that can come as a result of negative experiences, her growth and evolution as a manager and business owner, how parenthood affected her goals, the pros and cons of working with famous people, the nervous feelings that come with creating art, our shared Enneagram personality profiles, some of her favorite books, and much, much more. Whether you're interested in art, fashion, the creative process, entrepreneurship, or balancing a career with parenthood, you'll glean a lot of value from this conversation. A huge thank you to Kathie for taking the time to talk, and thank you for listening. Hope you enjoy. Kathie, I am so glad to be talking with you. We've ended up having a few phone calls in the lead up to this, and this has been a long time coming. So I'm super excited to finally get to ask you a bunch of questions because I've been following your work for so long. And one of the things you mentioned when we were talking on the phone the other day, I was just kind of asking you about how you ended up doing this work, and probably kind of like a repeat of exactly what we're going to talk about today. But you said you grew up in a family where art and creativity and all that kind of stuff was the norm. And so it was not a big, crazy leap you took, kind of pointing your direction coming out of high school towards the arts. And so I was wondering if you wouldn't mind starting out by talking about, how you grew up and your parents' influence on you and kind of how they built this foundation where creativity and craftsmanship and all that kind of stuff is kind of the norm, or was the norm when you were coming up.
My dad was highly creative. Mm-hmm. He started taking photographs when he was, I want to say, middle school. If it wasn't that early, it was definitely by high school, because in high school, he built a darkroom in his parents' garage.
Oh, wow.
So that he could develop his own film. And he subsequently moved his bedroom into the garage so that he could basically live in his creative space. Anyway, my dad started taking photographs when he was in high school and then went to art school to study photography. And I grew up on the Monterey Peninsula in a little town called Pacific Grove, which was right around the corner from Carmel, California, and just up the Highway 1 from Big Sur. And so my dad was immersed in the creative community there, which was highly photographically inclined. Like that was where Brett Weston and Ansel Adams were both located.
Oh, wow. Cool.
Yeah. And so my dad was able to work in proximity to them. And he even did some workshops with Ansel in Yosemite. And he knew the Weston family because of their work with the Friends of Photography in Carmel, California.
Yeah.
Which still exists. Yeah. So my dad was a part of that world, and he definitely kind of turned slightly away from it in order to have a family and start a business. So my childhood it's funny because it's not like my parents were living this wild bohemian, crazy, creative life, but my dad was merging his creative passion with having a small business and trying to raise a family. And so that was what was normalized for me. He worked all the time, and he was stressed out a lot, unfortunately.
The business, was it a photography business?
Yeah, he basically, I want to say, so he and my mom met because they were leading trips for the Sierra Club together. And so he graduated from art school and he had his creative practice in photography, but then he opened his own studio the year that I was born, and he had been doing commercial photography prior to that. He did a lot of work around our community, doing like shooting football games for the local community college and that kind of thing. But then the year I was born was the year he actually established his private studio where he did portraits. He also did a lot of weddings, commercial photography, that kind of thing. So he kind of shifted into more commercial photography when I was born. And then his life primarily became about maintaining the business side of photography. And he would take trips to do creative work, but it kind of, was sidelined a little bit. So anyway, when it comes to like the environment that I was raised in, my mom was a public school teacher who was basically the one that was kind of bringing in the regular paycheck and keeping us in health insurance and all that kind of stuff. But my dad was building this business based on the creative work that he enjoyed. And so I think that's what I meant when I said it was just normalized. Like I was watching my dad do photography as a business, and I saw the kind of struggles that he endured, and I saw my mom kind of working to help him keep things on the rails. And I think that is what I internalized, because it's not like I set off to establish a creative business, consciously knowing the hardships that I was getting myself into. It more was just like it was just a comfort zone thing. Like I was accustomed to the chaos of maintaining a small business energetically, even if it wasn't consciously.
Yeah, that makes sense. So when you went off to art school, what was was there a goal, or was it just, I really enjoy art and I want to go deeper in this? Or did you go into art school with a idea of where you thought it was all leading?
I actually thought I wanted to be a professor.
Did you really? Okay.
Yeah. I didn't love school until I got to college. And when I got to college, I fell madly in love with school. And so the idea of staying in a academic environment for the rest of my career seemed appealing. And so I was actually trying to get into graduate school so that I could pursue that when everything changed. And it was just because I didn't get into graduate school, and you then find yourself figuring out what you're going to do when plans didn't go as expected.
And what was your primary interest in art school? Like what did you study?
I was studying oil painting.
Okay. That's what I find all this info on the internet, but I'm scared to like really lead with it, because I'm like, it very well might be wrong or weird or something. But I'd seen the oil painting, so I was right about that. All right. So art school, you don't get into grad school. It's funny how stuff like that at the time can seem like such a blow, at least in my experience. But then in the end, like when you look back, you're like, man, I'm glad that didn't happen. Because one time I took the LSAT. I was like, sure, I was going to go to law school. And then I didn't. I don't think that worked out like I wanted it to. And God, I'm so glad I'm not a lawyer. So you get out of art school, and if the internet is correct, then you decide to go to Montana. Is that right?
Yeah, I graduated with an undergraduate degree and basically just needed a change of scenery as soon as possible. And my sister was literally driving through town on her way to Montana to take this job at a dude ranch that she'd gotten. And I just said, hey, if they needed anybody else, let me know. And she got there and they needed somebody else. So I dropped everything, got in my car and drove to Montana.
Where in Montana was it?
The ranch doesn't exist anymore. It was in this tiny little town called McLeod, Montana, which is basically just south as the crow flies from Livingston.
Yeah, like Big Timber area kind of in there.
Yeah, you go to Big Timber and then you go south from Big Timber to get.
That's one of the prettiest places anywhere. That valley through there.
It was there's a dirt road that connects McLeod to Livingston, and they filmed some of River Runs Through It in that area.
Oh yeah, I know. I was just talking about that area like 2 days ago. That's where like Tom McGuane and all those people have places.
Yeah, a friend of mine here in Austin just made a film about Tom McGuane and Jimmy Buffett.
Oh,
and
yes, I know.
Writer. They all lived in Florida together for a while. And
for people who are interested in that, there's this book that I just read called Mile Marker Zero, and it's about all those guys living together in the Florida Keys, Key West. And it's like McGuane, Harrison, Jimmy Buffett.
Yeah, Jim Harrison. That's right. That was the name.
And Hunter S. Thompson would show up. It's really, in a way, it reminds me, when I read that book, I was thinking about Austin, in the world you live in, where there are all these artists doing their thing. I love that. I mean, we could talk about that the whole time. So I don't want to derail it. So you go to this, when you were thinking about in the lead up to the Dude Ranch, had you ever been to Montana? Had you ever spent time in the Rocky Mountains? Like, was that something that you had ever considered?
Nope. I had never been to Montana, and that wasn't even necessarily anything that I was looking for. I did know that I wanted to kind of get away from the art school energy. I had a great time in college, but by the end of, 4 years of studying painting, I was a little disillusioned with the preciousness of kind of art on the walls art. So I was looking for something that felt a little more, I don't know, of the earth or disconnected from sort of heady navel gazing.
Yeah, no, I get it.
And my sister is always getting crazy, fun, weird jobs all over the place, and I hitched myself to her wagon.
And so, like, what can you summarize the experience? I mean, was it super fun? Was it super hard? All of the above? Like, I can't imagine.
Experience?
Yeah, the Montana experience. Like what, when you think back on it, what were the big takeaways?
Oh, it was so fun. It was one of the most formative experiences I've ever had in my whole life, in that I think it had to do with, it's really informed like almost everything I've done since then, in that. So I left art school, which was also fun, but pretty navel gazy. And then I just launched myself unknowingly into this environment that was the opposite of that, in that it was just work. It was a lot of hard work, pragmatic work, a lot of just being interwoven with a community in a way that was about communal support.
Yeah.
Also, the people that I met in Montana were extremely creative, but they were doing things they weren't compartmentalizing their creativity in the way that it felt like you almost needed to in an art school environment, which that's kind of painting with broad strokes. But, like the idea of, if you want to be creative, you need to channel your creative energy into a painting or a sculpture or a photograph or whatever. And then I got to Montana, and these people had the same curiosity and creative energy that they were then channeling into making a fence. There was all these welders there, and they would weld these incredible fences. And there was a lot of quilting, and these beautiful quilts were being produced. It just felt like there was an interweaving of creativity into pragmatic craft that I found extremely nourishing. It was the antidote to what I felt like had been kind of bothering me about art school. It was this like making things that were made to be used and interacted with regularly for pragmatic purposes.
That's when you were saying that, I was thinking useful art, whether it's the weld on the fence. And so did you, if I read correctly somewhere, that's where you started noticing some of the Western wear as kind of one of these mini artistic outlets that they had?
Yeah. I mean, I will say that I think that I first kind of fell in love with Western wear actually in art school, in undergraduate, because it was more the, kind of artsy. Like, I want to say rockabilly. Rockabilly has never really been my aesthetic, but like, I do think that the rockabilly niche is what has been one of the many niches that has sort of held Western wear and presented it to different groups of people in ways that is fun and interesting. And so I think I first fell in love with Western wear because a lot of my artsy friends in college were wearing it. And so that was my indoctrination. And then it was interesting to kind of go from that to the Montana iteration of embracing Western wear, which was very different in art school. It was a lot of like kind of threadbare old Western pearl snaps that, kind of almost more grunge adjacent. And then you get to Montana and everything is crisp, and even if it's not new, the desire is for it to look new, or at least look extremely well cared for. I learned then about like the exact way to get a good starched crease in the front of your jeans. I learned that you don't ever set your hat down unless the brim is facing up, and you don't touch anybody else's hat. Just things like that, like things about Western wear in Montana were culturally very different than what things were like in art school.
Wait, and I should have asked this earlier, but where geographically was your art school?
Northern California. And it was a state school. I majored in art, but it wasn't an art school. I just happened to go to a school where it was Humboldt State University, and there was all of these like expats from San Francisco and Los Angeles, all of these artists who were looking for a very remote place to make their art. And they posted up in far Northern California in the Redwoods. And so the school actually had this really lovely art program because of this culture of people who were trying to get away from the city, but who had great chops in the art industry.
And so I guess you finish up at the Dude Ranch. Man, that is a pretty spot. I was just actually just the other day talking about that area, and I was looking at it on Google Earth, and I've driven that dirt road before, and it's just, man, you never forget it. So you head out of there, and then what's next?
So my Montana work was seasonal. I there wasn't a lot of work, especially frankly then for women in the wintertime. So I would leave in the winter and then come back in the summer. I did overwinter there one year. But so for the most part, I was kind of there in the summer, and then I would do other things in the winter, either go home or travel or whatever. And so I did a bit of traveling, and then I decided I wanted to try to go to art school, graduate school. And so I tried to get into a school in Boston, and my cousin was living there. And so I just moved to Boston, applied for graduate school at the School of the Museum of Fine Arts, did not get in, and then just decided to live there for a little while and see how I liked Boston. And while all of that was happening, my high school boyfriend, who I went to Humboldt State with, moved to Austin, Texas, and we had kind of been doing an on again, off again long distance dance for a few years. And at that point, he said, I like Austin. I'm going to stay here. You can come. If you don't want to come, that's fine. But let's not do this long distance thing anymore, if that's the case.
Yeah.
So I left Boston at that point, moved to Austin, and have been here since. That was 96, I think, 96 that I moved to Austin.
And when did pastry chef come into the equation?
That was what I did in Boston.
Okay, got it. I feel like I know a lot of people that have made careers in the arts who at some point along the way have had experience as a pastry chef. What's the connection there?
Yeah, I think that that I do think that there's a lot of crossover, and I think it's because it's extremely creative, but there's also this sort of manageable outcome that you often can't find in other creative work. Like if you learn the recipe and if you get the chemistry just right, you can control the outcome, but you get to sort of express yourself creatively in the ingredients that you're putting together. I found that in bread baking. I found it in being a pastry chef. It felt really creative, but it also felt really nice to, for the most part, feel like I had a little more control over the outcome than often I would feel in painting or drawing or other creative endeavors.
Yeah. And again, it goes back to the useful art, I mean, there's nothing much more useful. I mean, that's about as useful as it gets, creating something you can eat. And, but wait, how is it? And I know nothing about cooking, and something's wrong with my taste buds. Cause I'm like, I don't care about food. It's really kind of pitiful actually. According to other people, I don't know any different, but how are you creative with that when with baking it is like chemistry? Because my wife's a really good cook, but when she tries to bake, she'll try to like improvise and then messes up the chemistry and then it doesn't work. And she's like, I can't do baking because I just like to kind of do whatever. So I mean, tell me about the creative process there.
I think that once you kind of know the rules, you can sort of break them. And maybe it's not so much that you're breaking the rules, it's that there's a spectrum of ingredients that you can dance around with while still adhering enough to the rules to get a product that you're relatively satisfied with. That being said, both my sister and I are notorious for not ever using recipes and doing a lot of baking. And so we both really love to get our hands on weird ingredients that might be somewhat less expected to be in a baked good and see if we can figure out a way to create something. So we're both always messing up. We are both always making disasters and laughing about it. But then every once in a while, you'll end up with this thing that's amazing, that is, full of crazy stuff that normally you wouldn't expect to find in like a brownie or something like that.
I love that. I mean, that's kind of like the secret to all creative endeavors. It's just, you're willing to go and try stuff out and be willing to fail. And you said you would laugh about it, which I think is the key versus just beating the hell out of yourself. Like a lot of people do, including myself, if you mess up, but like trying stuff out. And then every now and then it all comes together and you've created something brand new, very similar to what you've been doing at Fort Lonesome. I love hearing that. So when you showed up in Austin, was there any part of your brain that thought you were going to end up in you call it the fashion business, the clothing business? I mean, fashion sounds kind of New York City.
Right. Yeah.
What do you call it?
I think that is what we are. That's the industry that we're in.
Except you're in the fashion business.
Yeah. I have to accept it. I can't. I have a love-hate relationship with that. But,
I mean, was that at all in any part of your brain that you would end up doing that?
No, it sure wasn't. I came here, I literally had written a bunch of letters to bakeries prior to moving to Austin because I wanted to be the next Nancy Silverton. I was really, at that point in time, obsessed with baking and bread baking in particular. And so I came here with a job at Texas French Bread, wanting to learn more about sourdough, dove headlong into that. And then, I think often I had been working in a kitchen prior to moving here. But when I really dove headlong into what it looked like to kind of become a pastry chef, I became a little disenchanted, and in that the hours were weird, which
like
was
early morning stuff.
Yeah. But it's also like being a pastry chef is sort of, it's a little alienating in that you have to work around the sous chefs. You can't be on the line while they're on the line doing their thing. And so you have to come in very early so that you can get all your prep work done before they arrive. So it's often early hours alone. And then I found, and this was granted Austin, this was Austin, Texas in the late 90s, but it was extremely misogynistic.
Was it really?
The restaurant industry here was, I came up, it's funny because now having a daughter, my daughter's 22, and, so raising a Gen Z daughter, like this, it wasn't that long ago that I was her age, but the stuff that I dealt with in the restaurant industry then versus anything that she would anticipate be normalizing now is so different. I hope that's the case for her. That seems to be the case for her. Like the types of behavior that I thought of as totally normal would be really abhorrent to her. But yeah, it was not an easy place to be a woman. And it was definitely not an easy place to be a woman once I got pregnant with my first child. It was basically just a very clear, you have to get out of here moment.
Really?
So, yeah. Nobody, like any sign of femininity in the restaurant industry was a sign of weakness. And so being a pregnant woman in the restaurant industry was basically just like, you were just asking for trouble. This was my experience. I have heard this from friends of mine who are also in the restaurant industry. But for me, it felt like I was already struggling with what felt like dealing with some issues of gender inequity. And then as soon as I got pregnant, it was like I just dialed that up to 11. And there was no option to like take a minute and have a kid and then come back. It was you take a minute and you're out. You're fired, or you lose your job or whatever. You would have to quit.
When you look back at that time, does it make you like, you don't seem like you're angry about it, or like you got to, like you got something to, like it was some source of like, I'm going to show those people kind of thing. But like, what positive came out of that kind of rough experience? Because in my experience, I'm a weirdo, but in my experience, like some of the stuff that at the time made me like madder than I can ever imagine, or like really just turned me up in knots. When I look back at it, it's almost like I wouldn't trade it because it made me tougher, or it made me more resilient, or whatever. And if somebody had told me that in the moment, like when I'm like 25, 27 years old, I would have like, what the hell are you talking? Like, what are you talking about? This sucks. But looking back, I'm like, I wouldn't trade it. Was that, do you have a similar experience? Do you have a similar way of thinking about that? Or is it just like, screw those people?
No, I agree. I mean, this is a tangent I could go on and on about, because I do see the downsides of a lot of the lack of, or the desire for a complete lack of hardship that I feel like I'm seeing in the, kind of up and coming generations. It doesn't seem to be serving them as far as mental health is concerned. And not that I would necessarily want to like superimpose unnecessary hardships on anyone, but the idea of living a life free of hardship, I just don't think that that's in service to growth and health. And yeah, I think that period of my life, especially as I kind of came into being a boss that had employees,
yes,
was extremely informative, extremely like an avenue towards understanding and compassion that I wouldn't have had otherwise.
No, I completely agree with what you're saying. I often think about things like that. Like when I think about kind of my life or career or whatever, I have like kind of what I'm striving for in the future. I think about like swimming laps in a pool, and like on one wall of the pool is what I would like to have, and on the other side of the pool is like what I hate and what I'd want nothing to do with. And so I'm like pushing off of that side. And I think it's good to have bad stuff that you're like, whatever I do, I'm not going to do that. And oftentimes I don't know which one is more of a driver for me, the negative reaction to certain things or the like striving for positive things.
Oh my God.
Like Zoom calls are a negative thing for me. If I can have a life without Zoom calls, I would love that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I remember the first time I ever really embodied that realization of accepting, not only just accepting, but feeling grateful for really horrible things that had happened to me. It was the most empowering moment, maybe of my entire life. That sounds very hyperbolic, but I think it actually might be true. Like I just had somebody reframe some really challenging stuff from my childhood in a way that felt like a tool that I could use to actually become a better person, as opposed to feeling like I had been, I don't know, denied some idyllic childhood that I was entitled to. And it just changed. It completely reframed how I looked at anything hard. And not that I'm always successfully looking at hard things through this, lens of gratitude, but like it really opened up that door.
How old were you when you had that realization?
I mean, I was older. I wish I was younger, but I
no. That's how. That's why I asked.
Yeah, it was after my daughter was born, and that was in 2000. So it was probably.
Oh shit! You're younger than me. I mean, I was like I'm 45, and I feel like in the last maybe 7 years or so, I've finally figured out how to do that. And so shit, you were way ahead of me.
Well, I think you have to be a certain age or else it doesn't make sense. Like you have to have gone through enough difficult things to have the perspective on how those things have been in service to you. Otherwise, it's just a theory that you can attempt to absorb, but you're not going to metabolize it until life experience kind of allows those portals to open.
So when the baby arrived, I know when my first child arrived, it wasn't like instantly in the moment I knew that, all right, everything's going to change now. Well, you hear all these cliches about that. But at the moment, I was like, all right, I'm just not sleeping as much. And we got this new human that's got her own clothes that's in my house. And this is all crazy. But looking back, there was a shift for me in a lot of different ways. Did you experience? I mean, obviously you decided to stop doing the pastry deal, but like, was that kind of a big shift in your life creatively and just career wise? Yeah,
it was. And it's funny kind of looking back on it, I didn't necessarily anticipate that it was going to be, but at the same time, I think I was probably more ready for a change than I realized that I was. So like I said, my experience in the restaurant industry hadn't been entirely pleasant. So my daughter's name is Ramona. And when she was born in the year 2000, I think I was very ready for something different anyway. And so it just so happened that like kind of pouring myself into her and life as a mother I was just ready to kind of move on from what I had been working on. And so there wasn't a moment where I was like eager to get back to the kitchen. I was really like marching towards whatever was next. And what was next was her and anything that I could do to continue to bring in income while I was making her my primary focus. So I wasn't really like, I mean, I've always been able to kind of interweave being creative with my life, consciously or unconsciously.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't like feeling like I need to build a business that allows me to be creative. It was more like I need to find a way to make money. We weren't in a position where I could just take off and not be thinking about finances. So I did need to be thinking about how I was going to make money, but I also didn't have any desire to put Ramona into childcare in order to then go back to a career or pursue a career specifically. It was more like, how can I make some money while I'm also hanging out with my kid?
And so what did that manifest as?
I've always sewn. So I have my mom was a home ec teacher. And
you can do all this stuff. I can't do anything. Like I can send emails and I can run, like kind of run walk for a very long time. That's the extent of my skills. You can like bake stuff, sew stuff, paint.
I don't, yeah. I mean,
can I have like one of your talents,
busy
please?
work. I do like to keep busy, but sometimes I also like to run walk for long distances in order to get that busy box checked for the day.
Sorry, I interrupted. So you know how to sew. All right. You're rubbing it in my face.
My mom,
okay.
Yeah, my mom has always sewn. And so I grew up with some skills in sewing and was just trying to figure out how to make some money. And my midwife had a friend, another client who was looking for help. She had a career plan and wanted to start a children's kind of accessories line. And so she needed a sample maker. And so my midwife hooked me up with this woman, Kathie, and I started sample making for her line while simultaneously going, oh, that's interesting. So you're going to do what with these samples? You're going to take them to market? What's market? Tell me about market. You're looking for sales reps? What's that? Tell me about that. And so my friend Kathie, who was starting this business at the time, was just an absolute genius go-getter who was working with people who were studying business at UT, and she was getting all kinds of, I mean, she had huge, like she's no longer with us, but she was a big idea person and a big dreamer. And I just was kind of following along in her, she kind of grabbed me by the scruff of the neck and was like, this is what we're doing. And, and so we were taking things to market. And in the meantime, I was like, oh, well, I can take these things to market as well. I would make other baby things. And, you know, if we were going to New York to show her line, I was building a small collection and taking it to market also to see what happened when
of your own stuff, like your own stuff? Nice.
I started making like little baby Western wear.
Okay, cool. That's so cool.
That was where the Western wear thing got kind of rolling. My company was called Ramonster, which was our nickname for Ramona. And I made a few samples and me and Kathie went to market, and lo and behold, people really liked them. And we found some sales reps, and all of a sudden I was in the baby clothes business with Kathie, and I was looking for manufacturing in LA, and I was trying to figure out how to source things from overseas, and it got very chaotic and crazy very quickly.
But did you like that? Because obviously you love being creative, but it seems like that must have kind of captured your attention. Like you're obviously really good at it. So, I mean, did you like kind of the business stuff? Well, the results, you can think that, but the results, whatever you do, it works. And so like, did you enjoy kind of figuring out the business part, or was it just like, this is a necessary evil to get to keep doing creative stuff and make a living doing it?
I never figured out the business. When I was doing Ramonster, I never figured out the business stuff. Kathie was she was just a fast moving train, and she had her sights set on big things. And I was scrambling along behind her, kind of trying to follow the model of business that she was setting up for her business, which she was making like bibs and splat mats and these kind of like simple to sew, you know, splashy to look at items. Yeah. And I was making like little tiny pearl snap Western shirts with piping and pockets and basically like I couldn't scale like she could scale, but I was trying to.
Okay, got it.
But I couldn't see that I couldn't scale, even though I had people telling me that I couldn't scale. Like the business part of it was so foreign to me. And I had my blinders on because I just wanted to make this model that she had shown me could work. And, you know, I very quickly realized I had no ability to be creative anymore because all I was doing was trying to put out fires, and it was not financially doing what it needed to do. I was sort of robbing Peter to pay Paul, and very quickly, you know, I was borrowing money and losing it. And it's funny in retrospect. It was not funny at the time, but like it was several years of just trying to fit this square peg in a round hole. And finally what ended up happening is I had project managers in LA that were managing my production in LA, and I was doing all of the sample making and product development here in Austin in my garage with my kids, crawling around on the floor. And so I was so disorganized, and it was so chaotic. And I would just send things off to LA to be made, and the patterns wouldn't be quite right. And then they would get scaled incorrectly, and then they would be cut, and it would just be a mess and a waste. And at one point, all of my patterns were in LA, and I had asked for them all to be sent to Austin because I needed to find somebody here who could take all the patterns and work on them and get them where they needed to be. Yeah. And the box with all of my patterns, so this is years worth of pattern development. And this was like kind of pre everything being in CAD in the computer. Yeah. A FedEx truck, like it was one of the rare times where FedEx is like, yeah, so as far as we can tell, this box not only fell off the truck, but it fell off the truck and rolled down a hill into a rushing river and was never seen from again. The box was not just destroyed. Poof was gone with no trace. FedEx had no idea what happened to the box at all. And I kind of, at the moment, of course, was
I can't imagine
I was just completely freaked. But now in retrospect, I'm like, okay, it was the most giant flashing neon sign from the universe ever to just stop.
And so was that it? Was that the stop? Was that just a hard stop at that point?
It was a hard stop. Yeah. It was a hard stop for the production, which I was ready to kind of scale it back because I was losing so much money, and it was such a out of control situation. Fashion is just so wasteful in so many ways, and it's such like I could go on and on about the issues with seasons and time frames, and like making all of these things happen in these weird segmented boxes that you have to kind of like, there's just so many inorganic things about, especially this was, the early 2000s, trying to do domestic manufacturing in the fashion industry at that time it's not a place for small businesses. And then when you scale up to being a big business and you're not Patagonia, then you're just wasting a lot of resources, but you can afford to.
Yeah.
But when you're a small business, you're not scaled and you don't have margins, and you're still trying to meet these same seasons and timeframes and everything. And it was not anything that I felt okay about being a part of. So I had already decided I was going to downsize, and I was going to try to hopefully start focusing on smaller batches, smaller collections. And then all of that happened. And so I just kind of took a break for a minute, took a breath. And when I took a breath, I did have adults who were reaching out to me saying like, hey, do you think you could make that shirt that I have for my kid in my size?
Oh, that's cool.
Or, can you do this for me? Can you do that?
No, I'm back in the pastry business. Sorry.
I was very much considering something.
I bet so.
But that was the seed of basically like stripping everything back down to the bones and just doing one thing at a time and working with custom clients one at a time.
And so you start doing that. There's already a demand for it, and you're doing it. Was there a point when you realized, all right, there's something here and I can keep doing this and there's an opportunity here? Or was it just you were enjoying doing it and making enough money that it worked and you could, kind of taking it day by day?
When I look back from where I sit now, it was enough to kind of keep me at home. Like I did have enough work trickling in to keep me at home. It was not.
And you had two kids at this point, right?
Yeah. So that was the other thing. It's like when you have little kids like that, any work that you look at doing, if you're doing it from home, you can make this amount. If you're doing it not at home, then you have to make enough to cover the childcare and then also be bringing money home. And I could never quite figure out the thing that I could do that would make enough money to justify childcare. This was before my kids were of school age, nor was I particularly eager to like push them into a childcare situation because I wasn't feeling like it was important. Like I didn't feel like I had work to do that was so important that I wanted to miss out on the time with them when they were little. That being said, in retrospect, I have commentary about the way that I was sort of approaching the idea of quote unquote being with my children while I was simultaneously extremely distracted with trying to run a small business.
Sure.
I think that I was a little dogmatic in my idea about being with my children when I could have maybe been more present with my children had I actually put them in childcare, gone off to work, and then come home and been able to be more present to their experience instead of being in this no man's land of 24 hours a day being with them and trying to run a business. So hindsight's 2020.
Well, at least you look back, I think a lot of people just, I admire how you evaluate all this stuff and like, how could I have done it a little bit better and figure, I think a lot of people just, they don't have that ability to self-reflect. And so I love hearing that. And with childcare, that stuff, man, it's so complicated.
It is.
I mean,
it's really complicated. And
crazy.
I think that so Ramona was born in 2000. I don't really know, like big picture, what the zeitgeist was, but my lens into the kind of parenting zeitgeist of the early 2000s there was a lot of focus on, I'm trying to remember the name of the book. There was like the book that everybody read. It was, I can't remember if it was Dr. Sears or what, but like it was all attachment parenting and don't put your baby down until they're 6 months old and, never get a babysitter and nurse forever. And, things that like at their core are interesting and decent metrics to kind of strive for, as long as what is at the forefront is that you are experiencing joy in your life and you're showing your children that you want to be doing this and you want to be around them. And if you're not giving yourself a break to like go scream in the closet or go out to dinner or whatever, then what you're showing them is just that you're stressed all the time. And how on earth is that better than hiring a babysitter once a week or whatever? Like I just was kind of dogmatically attached to some of the principles that I was reading about. So I reflect back on that time and kind of like, if I could do that over again, there's definitely some things I would do differently. But at the time I was like, no, I want to be with my kids. So I'm going to work from home and I'm going to go crazy doing it. Wait, what was your question? I just totally went off on a tangent.
No, I love that's the whole point of podcast with the tangents. That's what I'm here for. But like, when did you know, all right, I'm doing something really unique here and I can ramp this thing up into
I know what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Right. So I was doing custom work for people, but it wasn't, I was enjoying it because it felt like I was able to take my art background, like my art school background, and instead of kind of filtering my creativity through pastry chefing or, what have you, I was able to kind of return to a more sort of graphic quality to drawing up these images that people were requesting and then figuring out how to embroider them onto custom garments. So that was when I started. I was doing Western wear just in the kind of most standard way. Like I was using pearl snaps and yokes and smile pockets and kind of a lot of the Western tricks that you use in order to make a garment look Western. But I wasn't doing a lot of embroidery until I started working just one-on-one with custom clients. And then I started to integrate more imagery into what I was doing. And I would sit down and I was doing it all by hand. I was doing hand embroidery of whatever image was requested. Some of it was just stuff that I wanted to do, and some of it was custom work. And in that time period, there was a group here in Austin called the Austin Craft Mafia. This was all, like early 2000s Austin had a really vibrant craft scene, and the Austin Craft Mafia was a huge part of that. They were this was all like pre-Etsy, when there was a lot of message boards, and the Austin Craft Mafia, they were a group of small businesses, women who had arts-based small businesses who would get together and craft, and they were kind of part of the forefront of bringing craft back into, I don't know how you describe it, except for that, like, they were bringing craft back to young people. So, there was a movement away from what would consider to be craft. So embroidery, crochet, scrapbooking, whatever. And they were kind of embracing the idea of craft again. And several businesses were started here, one of which was called Sublime Stitching, which is a woman, Jenny Hart, who now lives in LA, but she was in Austin. And she's really a huge, huge part of bringing hand embroidery back into the kind of lexicon of interesting modern art culture. And she and I would overlap at events. I was doing hand embroidered Western wear. She had a whole business that was educating people about hand embroidery as well as making art. And we got to know each other a little bit. And she had chain stitch embroidery machine that she had bought, I think, in Dallas, and had at her house, and just couldn't ever quite figure out how to get it to work in a way that felt accessible to her.
Yeah.
And so she asked me if I wanted to buy it, and I did. And then it sat in my garage for a number of years.
What made you want to buy that? Like why? I mean, it sounded like you kind of had your hands full doing other things. What was so curious about that thing that you're like, yeah, I'll buy that and put it in my garage?
Well, I knew enough about Western wear to know that chain stitch embroidery was the type of embroidery that was done on classic Western wear.
Yep.
And so I knew that there was this shared legacy. And I also was very attracted to the idea of any type of embroidery that could be done more quickly than hand embroidery.
Yes.
So it felt like, oh, that's one of those machines. And this is at a time where these machines were nowhere to be found unless you found your way to like a funky old shop that was still making Letterman's jackets.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, obviously, like these machines were around. They had fallen out of favor in embroidery shops because once everything was able to be digitized and the machines evolved where you could just load a computer chip in and the machine would do all of the embroidery for you. Obviously, those are far, far more affordable, not to buy, but to, like, if I was a person who wanted to have, an embroidered hat or an embroidered work uniform or whatever, like, you're going to go the digital route because it's so much cheaper. And so all of these big embroidery shops switched from doing any kind of like hand guided embroidery work to doing digital computer embroidery. So a lot of these machines had just been moved into their basement, and years and years and years go by, and suddenly there's nobody at the shop anymore that has any idea how to use these machines. So they just stay in the basement. People then don't even know they're in the basement, and definitely wouldn't know what to do with them were they to find their way out of the basement. And so that was kind of this era where the machines were out there. There was obviously people who were using them, but there was no shared cultural language around what we do with these machines anymore. So they were, for better or for worse, for the most part, obsolete. And this was in early internet days, and I would search and search and search and search, and there was no information on the internet about these machines. And so it sat. And then every once in a while I would search and search and search, nothing. And so it sat, and I would mess around with it, and I would start to take it apart. And I had a couple of friends here in town who were just like engineering minded people who I would ask them to come over and take a look at the machine to see if they could help me get it functioning. But these were not sewing people. They were just people who understood basic machinery. And so I kind of started to understand a little bit more, or at least feel a little bit more confident about taking the machine apart. and putting it back together again. And in the meantime, I was blogging about this whole thing.
So when people would be in your shoes, they could find you.
Right. Well, and that's what ended up happening. Was I ended up connecting with a couple of people, one guy in particular in Indianapolis who also had come across a machine and didn't really know how to use it. And at the time, I had 2 little kids. He did not have children at that point in time. So he really focused entirely on trying to figure out if he could find people who understood how to use the machines, which he did. He found people who were working in costume departments and in opera houses, and people who were working in East LA in like motorcycle club type environments. And like he was able to he started, what were they called? Like Yahoo groups. I think they were called the Yahoo groups.
Oh yeah. I vaguely remember that.
Yeah. He started one of those where he was able to kind of like pull people out of the shadows who had little bits of information, and he aggregated enough information so that both he and I, as well as other people, were able to get their machines going. And as soon as I got my machine going reasonably consistently, that was when my eyes opened wide to the possibilities of what I could actually do. Because I went from, there's a whole piece of it where it was like I was in this craft world. And I saw these people who were really re-exploring what could be done and how to make things by hand. But they had gone all the way back to the very basics of like hand embroidery, sewing on a domestic machine at home, back to the very, very, very basics. And I started kind of realizing as I went through my learning curve of being in the fashion industry with my children's clothing line, like I kept thinking like there's got to be a happy medium where you're not necessarily in the full-fledged fast fashion, like everything's not only mechanized, but it's being done in a place where you're not even a part of it anymore. And the other end of the spectrum, which was everything just being done entirely by hand. I kept thinking like there's got to be a happy medium here where we're able to integrate the right tools to be efficient and to be actually maybe even more technically precise without throwing the baby out with the bathwater and just sending it all off for automation. And when I got my machine working, I felt this incredible sort of symbiosis of human and machine. That moment to me was the moment where everything kind of opened back up, or even opened up initially, because I felt the connection I felt with this machine was really unreal. And after kind of slogging away for so long, doing things just extremely slowly and not ever really being able to see my way to making a thing where there was ever enough of a margin on what I was charging to be able to make a living. So the machines were really the moment. It was also like a cultural moment that I knew the machines were going to be just embraced enthusiastically, because there was actually this funny shift happening in the zeitgeist from handwork to machine-aided production work. Like it was when denim became a big thing again. And so there was all these dudes and their machines making jeans. Yep. And I was kind of like, why is it such a male-dominated thing? All of a sudden it went from this very feminine craft movement to like what felt like this very male denim kind of oilcloth production movement. And I just kind of felt like I wanted to insert myself into that somehow and introduce these machines. But the machines themselves actually have this kind of feminine quality, and that you really do have to work with them in a gentle kind of you have to coax them. You have to guide them. It's almost like this. I don't want to make too much of it, but you do develop these relationships with these machines that are extremely symbiotic. And so the machine was really what kind of like shifted everything and pushed me into rebranding and reframing and relaunching the business as Fort Lonesome.
It's so cool. And I'll put links. There are a lot of videos on YouTube of where people can see you working on the machines. And it really is, it's unlike, what somebody would think of as, sewing something. I mean, there's like movement on many different planes. There's many different planes of movement, at least the way I saw it. It is almost like the machine is like, you got the product you're making, and then there's you, the artist, and then the machine is like the third, almost like the third artistic generator of the thing. It's really, really cool. And so I read somewhere or either watched somewhere that you were looking at kind of the traditional way that chain stitching was done and the colors and the products that came out. And then you started thinking about it more from an oil painter's perspective and kind of decided to try some new stuff, going back to what we talked about earlier about, just, hey, let's try a bunch of crazy stuff, and a lot of it won't work, but some of it will. Can you talk about that process of kind of figuring out, combining your background in oil painting with this new craft that had come your way?
It's a product of not having mentorship, I guess, which there's a lot of reasons why I have felt sad about not having strong mentorship in this world. And it's not that there was nobody out there doing chain stitch embroidery. I just genuinely couldn't find them at the time. And so I ended up with this tool that was not being used very much. And from what I could see, it wasn't being used in ways that felt like how I would like to be able to use the machine. Like I came from an oil painting background where there was just a ton of texture, a ton of blending, and kind of, you've got your palette, and then you get to just mess around until you end up with the color that you want, or the thickness that you want, or the texture that you want, or whatever. And so the upside to not having anybody teach me how to use a machine was that I just kind of kept messing around with it until I didn't know what it couldn't do.
Yeah. I love that. I love hearing that.
So I wanted to figure out if I could blend thread like I could paint. And with hand embroidery, to a certain extent, there's ways that you do that. And it just has to do often with like layering up a bunch of different thread until you back up from it a little bit and you kind of get the sense of this blend. So I just started doing that with the machine. And what I was working on at the time was a giant embroidered moon. And I was trying to figure out how to get the craters, but also just the kind of general sense of light and dark and all the gradation within those two. And so I just started kind of going in and laying down thread and then going back in with other colors and laying layers and layers and trying to figure out how, because with this machine, the more layers that you pile on of thread, the more like you are to like create a very hard surface that then breaks the needle or breaks the thread or destroys the fabric. So then it became a dance of like, how do I layer things, but without building up so much thickness that it just becomes this sort of like thread armor that is then destructive and breaks everything down. So there was just a lot of experimentation and ended up kind of developing. And by then I had some employees. And so I would kind of mess around with it, and then we would talk about it, and then somebody else would kind of mess around with a different way of looking at it. And so I had people to bounce things off of here in the shop. And we ended up developing this sort of technique that gave the ombre effect that we really were looking for, the sort of blended effect that we were looking for, that as far as we knew hadn't really been done very much. So it felt really fun to be able to have a medium that hadn't been so entirely explored. Yeah. So that was kind of what came out of that was feeling like there was this new tool that we built together.
When was the first time, I don't like talking about celebrities too much, but like, because I'm not obsessed with celebrities, but I know a lot of celebrities love your stuff, and a lot of celebrities. So when was the first time like a super famous person wanted one of your pieces?
When I was still doing everything by hand, it just so happened that my midwife, who I then became friends with and our lives started to interweave, a good friend of hers is the partner to Richard Linklater.
Okay.
And I guess she commissioned a shirt for Richard, I think is how that worked. Yeah. I made him a shirt and then maybe made him another shirt. And then maybe he was really kind of into it. And so he commissioned some shirts for actors that worked on his films.
Oh, okay.
One of whom was Ethan Hawke, one of whom was Matthew McConaughey. And so things started kind of filtering out to these celebrities through Richard Linklater. So he was kind of our pathway to having those photos that then it's just amazing how you get a photograph of a famous person wearing something that you made. And it's wild to me how much that then legitimizes you to some people.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the early days of working with celebrities. And then it just so happens that what we do, because we make flashy garments, we are often dealing with performers of some sort or another, or people who are, looking at being looked at. So because of Richard, we ended up getting that exposure. And then at some point, I don't know do you know who Nikki Lane is?
Yes. I think I was not familiar. And then through getting ready for this conversation, I saw a lot about Nikki Lane.
Okay. So at the time she was living in Nashville, and she's somebody that I just think it's so interesting when you're kind of in a weird niche and you know how you kind of can see the evolution of a trend in a way that maybe other people aren't seeing it. And I feel like Nikki Lane was the reason that a lot of other people decided that they loved Western wear.
Oh, I see. Yeah. She was like the first one out.
Yeah. And she's gorgeous and she wore it well and she wore it in this interesting kind of modern way. And she was friends with Jenny Lewis and so we had been working with Nikki Lane, and then that led to working with Jenny Lewis, and we did several things with Jenny, and then Jenny got exponentially more exposure than Nikki did. And that just then all of a sudden we were, out there in the world as recognized people doing Western wear. And right then was when it kind of hit as like a massive trend in the entertainment industry, which was wild to be a part of.
And so when you're working with Nikki Lane, and I mean, I think like in the artistic process, like when you're painting, you paint a picture and even putting that picture, I would guess if it were me, putting the picture out in the world can be kind of nerve-wracking because you've created this thing and you put it out in the world and you're kind of like, well, we'll see if the world likes it or not. And so when you're thinking about what, making these garments with Nikki Lane, it is part of her performance as well. Like when she's wearing that on stage, it's a reflection of her art as well. And so how do you kind of manage that going back and forth with the client to figure out how your vision for the garment can also match their vision for what they're trying to project when they're wearing it or doing their thing while they're wearing it? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's a concept that we are perpetually in relationship with, because we also have to manage the energy with which a client comes to the relationship. Because you take like Nikki or Jenny, both of them were basically like, we like what you do. We think you do it well. Here's a couple of ideas. Go crazy. And that is always what works the best.
Yes.
is when
let you do your thing.
Yeah. Like they, Jenny in particular was sort of crafting a whole element of her performance around what she's wearing. Nikki just has an incredible collection of vintage Western wear as well as new pieces. And so she's got a look, but Jenny would build outfits around albums.
Okay.
Thematically.
Wow.
And so it really was like, if she was wearing one of our outfits, it would sort of be for the cycle of a record, where she's wearing it every night at her show, because the costume is part of the performance. And so we were able to kind of A/B the difference between being a piece of somebody's wardrobe versus being the piece of somebody's performance, like an element, an energetic element of the whole package that is a live performance. but working with both of them was always super great. You then kind of graduate into the next level of, I don't know if it's the next level. That might be the wrong way to say it. But like Jenny and Nikki are both, they're crafting their whole presentation. Mm-hmm. They don't have a lot of team members who are involved in assisting them with how their performance should be crafted.
Got it.
There's a lot of people out there who are less interested in crafting their aesthetic appearance to the world. And so then you start to get into the world of teams and
stylists. Is that what they call them?
Stylists. Oh, yes, stylists. And some stylists that we've worked with are just like working with Jenny, where the stylists will say, hey, we think you guys do great work. We want you to just do your thing. And then other stylists have a lot of other issues that they need to make sure we know about, like, budget and ego and whatever. And the art direction can basically just become a death spiral of who's got creative control and whose vision is attempting to be seen through in the final garment. And yeah, so it can look a lot of different ways. It can be extremely organic and extremely satisfying, and it can be very, very soul-sucking and tragic.
There was some, it was like a news story I think I came across when I was preparing for this, and it was about one that you had made for Matthew McConaughey. And I think it was really cool. It was like wrestler masks, I think. Uh-huh. But you had said that when you you sent it to him, or it, and you never really saw it. And it was almost like it kind of stung a little bit because you thought maybe he didn't like it. And then years later, he shows up wearing it, and it's just like everybody's going crazy about it. But I thought that was interesting how somebody, you're so successful in that world, you're making these things for all these well-known people, and yet you still had that twinge of self-consciousness or maybe like, oh, he doesn't like it. And do you still have that as an artist, just kind of this nervousness when you put things out into the world about how they're going to be perceived one way or the other?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I don't know.
It's because you're not crazy. You'd be crazy otherwise. I mean, I knew the answer, or I hoped I knew the answer when I asked you that, but I feel like you'd be a complete maniac if you had any other way of going about it. Maybe. Yeah, I don't know.
I will say I have a reputation for being extremely skeptical and extremely
loyal skeptic.
Yes, the loyal skeptic. But I'm very guarded now with my enthusiasm because of having my heart shredded so many times by putting things out into the world and having them rejected. And it shifts your experience of putting things out in the world, because there's a part of me that is so much more waiting almost for either rejection or like I have built up enough walls in order to protect myself from that rejection so that sometimes I don't allow myself to get really excited about anything ever.
Has that been a effective way of, does it work? Like, are you able to not get so wound up about it? And this is, I'll tell people listening who did not listen to our phone calls, we have the exact same personality. We figured it out on the Enneagram that Kathie and I are both number 6s, called loyal skeptics, and we're very skeptical. And I do the same thing. I'm not doing anything as cool as you are, but like with podcast things, like if there's a potential that I'm going to get to talk to somebody that I've been excited about, I don't tell anybody. I don't think about it. Yep. I don't talk about it, because when it doesn't work out, as it often doesn't, I'm like, it kills me. It kills me.
It kills me. And it's so, yeah, that's so funny. Cause in the shop, it's like I've got 8 employees that I'm working with, and it's just an ongoing joke. Cause I'll be like, okay, so this is happening. I've known about it for months. I didn't want to breathe a word about it to anybody until I knew for sure that contract was signed, like invoice paid, whatever. I hold everything so close and quiet because when I would get excited in the past and and kind of pump things up, then they wouldn't happen. I mean, there was a couple of projects. There was one project in particular where I couldn't get out of bed for days because I was so completely destroyed by the rejection. So now it's good in some ways. I think it's just one of those things like in life where you can observe it, and you just have to try to be aware of when this tool that you've built for yourself is no longer in service to your growth.
Yeah. I think I've been thinking about that concept a lot recently. And I just think it's really important for people to understand, because like if they're on the outskirts looking in, they go to a Fort Lonesome website, or they look at all the famous people and cool musicians and all these cool people that are wearing your clothes. I think it could be easy for somebody to be like, oh, well, Kathie's got it all figured out. Like she just makes these things and is super, and all these movie stars are falling over themselves to get it. But I really think it's important for people to understand, like, you're an artist, and it's still this artistic struggle, I guess, to, even as you've gotten so good at what you're doing, the struggle's still there, Oh
yeah. Well, and even like just what you said, like the way that you presented that, the reality is that there's not movie stars and musicians that are tripping over themselves to get access to what we do. Like sometimes we get a high exposure client, and that can be really fun and it can be rewarding in certain ways. For the most part, what we are doing is we are working with people who are getting married, or people who are, going to a retirement party, or just people who are looking at being a little bit more intentional about what they wear. And we're fortunate that we've had these experiences working with famous people so that we can utilize that as a marketing tool, as well as sometimes it's genuinely just fun. But also, we lose out on those kinds of jobs all of the time because of people who can do things more affordably, or because of people who are basically like, able to just copy what we do and do it without having to like pay a living wage and all those things. Like we are also dealing with the muck of being an extremely low margin small business in an expensive city, where we're struggling to make ends meet and struggling to be able to land a job. I think that there's the idea that we've hit a level of smooth sailing, even from a business perspective, is not real. So like, yeah, we are all artists who all get our hearts shredded. And also we are all like hustling like crazy and working our asses off, and really nobody's getting rich doing it. And so that is also real and part of who we are and what we do.
There's do you read Seth Godin at all? The marketing guy?
I used to. I haven't in a while.
There was something where he was talking about that saying where it's like, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? And I'd always thought that was kind of a strange saying, because I'm like, well, why would you do it? Like the whole point is kind of, there's, seeing if you can figure it out. But, and he said that he agreed that's not right. And the way he likes to think about it is, what would you do even if you knew you would fail? Like if you knew that it still wouldn't work out. And I feel like that's kind of a neat thing to think about with creative stuff. I mean, it's different when you're talking about a straight up business where you have employees and that kind of thing. But this idea that like, it's worth doing because you like doing it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's just a kind of a cool filter to run things through. Because at least that's how my podcast was for 5 years. I never made any money on it, but I just liked doing it. And I was willing to stay up late at night doing it. But then it changes when it turns into a business, yep. As you well know, a lot better than I do. Last question about Fort Lonesome. Do you have a vision for the next 5, 6, 7 years, or is it just keep cranking and keep seeing where it evolves and be open to opportunities as they come your way? We're
actually in the process of like reworking we've never really had like a kind of normal mission statement, but I just hired somebody that is going to come in and kind of help us build something that feels more like a mission statement, because I do really feel like the last few years going through the pandemic. We just went through such a crazy, chaotic time where just prior to the pandemic was when there was this insane Western wear trend in the entertainment industry. And so we were just going hard in the paint on celebrity after celebrity after celebrity. And they would be all these projects that were like extremely kind of intoxicating in their ability to make us feel relevant and like just make us feel in ways that were, when we stepped back from that a little bit, like a little inorganic and inauthentic. Like when you're kind of constantly working with stylists that are trying to keep you on trend, and you're working with you're trying to like align with something that they can take to their client, and it just throws you off course. So we were doing that for several years, and then the pandemic hit, and we, as far as I know, all small businesses struggled. We definitely struggled, and we were working super hard just to, like on a very sustenance level. That sounds maybe a little extreme, but like we just lost tons of money. And so we were just in triage mode. And that is not a good mode to be addressing. Like, what do you really want when you're trying to keep 8 people's paychecks paid? So we've just had enough time post-pandemic, I think, to kind of like re-normalize a little bit and get to a point where we're like, what do we want? What are we going to move towards? And so we're working on that now. And I think for a lot of us, it's going to look a lot like, what else? I mean, like Western wear is fun, and that'll always be a paradigm that we're playing with. But there's a whole lot of other creative work that, I mean, we are a group. We are like a cohesive group of several people with interesting and exciting ideas that they want to throw at the wall. And what I want more than anything is for everybody to feel like they can utilize this platform that we built together as a tool to get their creative vision out into the world. It's just how do you do that cohesively with so many voices that can either, be very dissonant sometimes and sometimes really resonant with one another.
Yeah. And I guess you kind of want both, you don't want everybody to have the same opinion, but at the same time, they got to come together at some point. So that's exciting. That it's almost like the pandemic was a much more drawn out and intense version of that FedEx box disappearing. Like it forced this reevaluation and focusing in and kind of figuring out, all right, what are we going to do now? So that's so exciting, man. Our mutual friend, Rick Wittenbreaker from Howler. If I have a stylist, it's Rick Wittenbreaker. I think he's my stylist. But he connected us, and he knew we would hit it off. And turns out we have like the same personality. But I'm telling you, I'm just such a huge fan of you and everything you're doing. And tell me some good books I need to read.
Oh gosh, the books. Okay, so I'm glad that you prompted me that you were going to ask this question, because otherwise, when I'm put on the spot for recommendations like this, I draw a complete blank.
Well, I just start rattling off Theodore Roosevelt books. I have I can do that all day.
I haven't. I know. The feeling is mutual when it comes to like we have a mutual appreciation society going, because I've been following your book lists forever, as well as the podcast. And so I'm just honored to be here first and foremost. But I really wanted to come to the table with like 2 perfect books that were a nice yin and yang of the 2 styles of, well, there's more than 2 styles of reading that I like to do, but I do. And I wondered if you would resonate with this as well, being a 6, a loyal skeptic, is I find myself kind of obsessively wanting to read nonfiction.
Oh yeah.
Because there's this need to like consume as much information as possible so that I have all of the information so that I can make the most educated decisions. And there's just so much to learn. So I have this need also to balance that out with fiction. I try to kind of force myself to read enough fiction to balance out and to bring kind of, to me, it's like I need the ethereal quality that comes with reading fiction to balance out the very kind of like heady intellect side. I don't know if you've dug into the work of Carl Jung, but I'm like, when I found Jung, I was like, oh man, this is my guy. Cause he was so fixated on his brain and his intellect being able to be a problem solver. And it took him really relinquishing that control and going deep into the, work with his psyche to kind of find his whole self. So I feel like balancing nonfiction and fiction is a good way to kind of explore.
I have the same feeling, but I'm not disciplined enough to do the fiction side of things. Like the
Really?
the nonfiction, I can read it all day long, and I feel like a great sense of accomplishment when I read a novel, which is silly. And again, I'm saying, right, like I need to be reading more. And I've got some interviews coming up that's going to force me to read a lot of novels. So I'm the same way. It's just I don't follow through on the other side of the yang.
Well, there's time. So the books that I was going to suggest, even though they have nothing to do with Western wear,
that's fine.
To do with fashion, but these are just two books that I've read in the last couple of years that just struck me especially deeply on both ends of the spectrum. On the fiction end is the book Hamnet, and I don't have it in front of me, and so I don't have the author's name in front of me, but Hamnet is basically like a retelling, or it's a narrative about Shakespeare told through the lens of Shakespeare's wife.
Oh, cool.
You kind of unpack as you're reading it. Anyway, it's genuinely the most beautiful, moving book that I've read in forever and ever and ever. If
really?
Not maybe
okay.
Ever. I love it so much. And then nonfiction, a book that I read that I think you would love is, I can't remember what it's called. I think it's called The Eastern Sierra, A Love Story.
I feel like I've not read it, but I feel like I've come across that title before. What's it about?
The guy who wrote The Eastern Sierra, I think it's The Eastern Sierra, A Love Story, is a science fiction writer who has won a whole bunch of awards. And I've never read any of his science. I'm not a science fiction reader, so I haven't read those books. But he wrote a book it's his love song to the Sierra in general. Oh, the High Sierra, not the Eastern Sierra. The High Sierra, A Love Story. That's what it's called. That's what it's called.
Cool.
And the High Sierra is if I was to, I feel so lucky that there is a place on the planet where I can say, if I just am there, I am my best, happiest, wholest self. It's the place that brings me more awe and joy than anywhere else. That's the High Sierra. And so he feels the same way.
That's
awesome.
So
he wrote a book that basically talks all about the geology, the evolution of the mountain range. So it's very technical in that sense. But then he also kind of talks culturally about the people who explored the area, the Native American, the Native Americans that lived in that area forever, and well, not forever, but for a long period of time. The naming of certain areas. And
I love books like that, like really
so
zoned in on a very specific thing. I love that.
Yeah, and he's just this incredible science, and he can kind of tie in how learning about the mountain range informed his writing in developing worlds in his science fiction.
I haven't read either of those, and they come from you, so they're on the list, up high on the list. Speaking of science fiction, I don't read science fiction either, but I just read The Martian, and it was made into a Matt Damon movie.
Yeah.
But I don't know why I got it. I got it from the library, and it was one of the best things I've ever read. It was so good. And the guy who wrote it, he self-published the thing. Like he wrote it on a blog.
I remember reading that. Yeah.
It was really cool, but I can't remember ever reading a science fiction book as an adult. But it was awesome. Well, those are great books. Thank you. And thank you for taking the time to chat. This is really, really awesome. And I feel like we could have kept right on talking. Next time I'm in Austin, we'll do a part 2. But
yeah,
keep up the great work. Like it's really inspiring, and it's just so cool to hear about your journey. And I just appreciate you being so open with everything and being so thoughtful with everything. And I can't wait to hang in person one of these days.
I hope that happens. I really do. I hope you come to Austin.
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. I know your time is valuable, so it means the world that you spend it listening. If you want to support the podcast and help it to continue to spread and grow, there are a few ways you can help. Number one, pass it along to a friend or share it on social media. Word of mouth recommendations are the most powerful way for ideas to spread, so I'd love it if you could share the podcast with a few pals who might enjoy it. Number two, you can go to Apple Podcasts and give it a 5-star review. Good reviews encourage the Apple overlords to suggest the podcast to others. So there's a link in the notes if you'd be so kind as to give it 5 stars. Number three, you can support the podcast financially via Patreon, and there are exclusive benefits for those who do, including a monthly behind-the-scenes newsletter, Mountain and Prairie stickers, live and recorded video chats with podcast guests, and much more. Number four, I've also got 2 emails that I send out. The first is my weekly email called Good News from the American West, which I send out every Wednesday. It's only positive news, something we can all use a little more of these days. And my other email is my bi-monthly book recommendations email. One email every other month with 5, 6, 7, or 8 books that I've recently read and highly recommend. But thousands of people on both of these lists will vouch for me. No spam or other funny business. And number 5, finally, check out my online store for Mountain and Prairie stickers, shirts, and coffee mugs. I've got some really cool designs from Western artists with more on the way. So head to mountainandprairie.com/shop to check it all out. I'd love to connect with you. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn, so look me up on either of those platforms by my name or through the links on my website. All right, that's it. Thanks so much for your support.